In 1917, a 9-year-old boy picked up a cigarette butt off the street and pleaded, "Look, won't you give me an audition?" "Listen to me," he responded. "No, I'm sorry. We have all the voices we need." That was the beginning of an addiction that would ruin America's most well-known voice. Mel Blanc, who smoked 3 packs a day and occasionally recorded for 14 hours straight before collapsing, voiced Bugs Bunny. Despite earning only $350 every week, he made Warner Brothers billions. The studio booked a last-minute session, so he was unable to attend his son's graduation. Additionally, Warner Brothers permanently locked away his voice recordings when he attempted to bequeath them to children after his death. We're revealing the tragedy of the man who brought laughter to the world today. On May 30, 1908, Melvin Jerome Blanc was born in the Mission District of San Francisco. His parents, Frederick and Eva, were Jewish immigrants who operated a small women's clothes store in an attempt to make ends meet. But the business kept failing. Their firm was destroyed by department stores, and Frederick's covert gambling habit made matters worse. They were so impoverished by the time Mel was 6 that he started selling hats on the street to make money. The door began to be knocked on by creditors. The home was packed with arguments, and they had no other option by 1915. In an attempt to avoid the debts, they packed up everything and fled to Portland, Oregon. Portland didn't make things better, though. Mel picked up a cigarette butt from the sidewalk in 1917 when he was just 9 years old. A whole pack-a-day addiction developed from that one incident. He was simply a young child who, after being teased at school, retreated behind buildings to smoke and relax. His parents didn't even notice because they were too preoccupied with their financial issues. By 11, his breathing was labored and his chest constricted. The chilly weather in Portland didn't help. He developed asthma, which he had throughout his life. It didn't work out at school. Mel was often expelled from Lincoln High for his excessive chatting and clowning. But when he was 13, something occurred. He mimicked a bully's voice so well during an assembly that everyone froze. The bully started crying. Perhaps for the first time, Mel felt strong. He practiced in alleys and reverberating streets without any coaching or training. A teacher then yelled at him when he was 16, "You'll never amount to anything. You're just like your name." It was Blanc. One sentence struck a deep chord. After returning home, he spelled it Blanc. He was done being invisible after that day. He made animal noises at a church fair when he was 14. He received 50 cents. He continued to perform while gasping in between acts. His voice was being used to feed an addiction that was gradually destroying the one thing he was brilliant at. But his family was unaware of this. They felt a sense of pride. He was choking. Today, the debt had increased by $5,000 to nearly $80,000. In order to survive, he was performing with a damaged voice. Then the secret that made all the difference appeared. Mel learned why they had left San Francisco when he was 15 years old in 1923. His father had borrowed money from risky individuals and accrued enormous gambling debts. Losing the store was no longer the only concern. It was a matter of survival. Mel became a newsboy after quitting school. With the business, he made more money selling papers than his parents did. They had to rent out bedrooms because their house became so small. While strangers resided a few feet away, Mel slept in a small storage area. He was an adolescent balancing job, addiction, anxiety, and a voice that was beginning to crack under the strain. He began playing saxophone and serving as MC for the Hoot Owls Orchestra at the age of 16, earning $25 a week. However, he was unable to resist incorporating animal noises into the song. He made a barnyard brawl out of a love ballad one evening. His comrades threatened to quit, and the audience jeered him as he left the stage. Some places dismissed him, but others hired him because of the upheaval. Not being forgotten was preferable to becoming notorious. He wed Estelle Rosenbaum in 1926. He hurried to a radio audition just as their honeymoon was coming to an end. The sex execs were taken aback by his faltering hillbilly voice. He was paid $15 per show. Estelle believed she had married a musician who lived a pure life. Mel, however, was chain-smoking 2 packs a day behind the studio doors. He covered everything up by using cologne, mints, and even coffee beans to cover up the odor. She was unaware for 3 years. When she unexpectedly entered and noticed ashtrays piled high, she discovered the truth. Their marriage almost terminated as a result of the shock. The elephant then appeared. In 1927, Mel abruptly trumpeted like a savage elephant during a serious news presentation. It was so real and powerful that the radio signal was lost. He was immediately sacked by the station. After learning about the affair, however, KFBB San Francisco hired him in a matter of days. He made Uncle Don the Clown there. 50,000 individuals were watching in a matter of weeks. The audiences adored it. Executives detested it. Despite being called a freak, no one could stop listening to him. He was heckled for making animal noises when playing in Chicago in 1928. Mel did something unexpected and ended the show. Like a herd of hyenas, he imitated the laughter of the entire audience. People froze because it was so realistic. One man remained while others left. A scout for Warner Brothers. He offered Mel a job as a radio pilot after the broadcast. It led to everything, yet they only got $50. He almost lost everything when NBC awarded him a contract in 1929. No breaks, 12-hour recording days. And worse, he was smoking 3 packs a day. He once passed out from withdrawal during a live broadcast. Lying, NBC claimed that there were technical difficulties. The $200 a month barely paid his first law housing mortgage. So he continued. According to the contract, he would be dismissed if he missed even one session because of illness. He dared not become ill. Mel had just $29,750 when he went to Los Angeles in 1930. He went to Disney to try out. Mel's vocals, according to Walt, were too urban and ethnic. He was offered $18 per week by Warner Brothers. The fine print was harsh. Warner's voice was his lifelong property. He was prohibited from working elsewhere. They could dismiss him right away if he declined even one role. He was confined. He captured 23 distinct animal sounds in a single take in 1931. The Warner crew was blown away. In its first month of operation, the short made $47,000. He received $25. He wasn't even given credit by Warner. He later learned that his recordings had been covertly used in 6 more cartoons without his consent. He put in 63 hours a week in 1932. He made roughly $616 a month by doing the voices for 28 cartoons. He recorded for 7 cartoons in a single day on November 8. He had a torn throat. He risked his Warner contract by playing drums on the radio in secret at night, under a false identity in order to make ends meet. At 3 in the morning, according to Estelle, he practiced drum patterns on pillows. To keep quiet. He had laryngitis from the stress. To get through between recordings, he had to gargle honey. Everything changed on June 22, 1933, after a confrontation with director F.Z. Frying. His voice sounded too Jewish, according to Frying. Mel left. He came back hours later and used 7 distinct American accents to create a flawless take. $52,000 was earned by the cartoon. Nothing more was given to Mel. Later, Frying acknowledged that he intentionally offended Mel, since it sharpened the voices. Warner established that strategy as the norm. They desired unadulterated passion. How they got it didn't matter to them. Next up was Porky Pig. Mel developed Porky's voice in 1935 by drawing inspiration from his own stutter as a child. He honed it over several weeks. Warner was aware that it was gold. Although they claimed its executives were the original creators, they promptly patented the character. There was no mention of Mel's name. In just 6 months, the animation earned $89,000. They were earning more than $1.2 million annually by 1937, thanks to Porky merchandise. Mel Blanc was only getting $37.50 each time. He taped a session in the summer of 1937. Then, during a cartoon called A Wild Hare, an unexpected event occurred. His casual, "What's up, Doc?" was not part of the script, and he was doing Bugs Bunny's voice. He just said it when he was on stage, eating carrots during his early vaudeville shows. However, Tex Avery, the director, stopped everything as he shouted it into the microphone. The line, in his opinion, seemed too informal and unprofessional for a cartoon. Leon Schlesinger spent $15,000 testing the line, with 500 preview audiences in 12 cinemas, since the studio wasn't sure either. The outcomes were evident. 89% of viewers found it humorous and catchy. Upon its initial release, the cartoon earned $200,000, and subsequent releases generated $2.8 million over the following 10 years. However, Mel Blanc never received any royalties from it. Because carrots were too quiet for the microphones, he even had to bite celery to simulate eating them. In the end, that chewing sound became one of the most imitated noises in entertainment. By 1938, Blanc had agreed to one of the most difficult contracts in animation history, when he signed a new one with Warner Brothers. Even though Bugs Bunny alone was bringing in $5 million annually for the corporation, He was restricted to a weekly maximum of $300. No other studio let him to work. He was unable to accept MGM's $1,000 per session offer to voice Tom and Jerry, since his Warner contract stated that any outside employment would result in his termination and a 5-year ban. Even worse, he was prohibited from attending premieres, receiving credit on screen, and telling anybody that he voiced the characters. Black was in a small basement recording voices as studio executives went to lavish Hollywood parties. He occasionally performed 12 distinct voices in one sitting. The contract's most agonizing provision stated that Warner Brothers would always control his voice, even after his passing. Up until 1946, that clause remained in effect, costing him an estimated $2.3 million in lost revenue and notoriety. Behind the scenes, things were sour in March 1939 when they were working on Daffy Duck. Mel drew inspiration for the Duck's lisp from a former coworker at a radio station. Chuck Jones, the director, didn't like it though. He wanted Daffy to sound more sophisticated rather than foolish. They got into a furious altercation. Blanc said that he was ruining the fun when Jones accused him of making cartoons cheap. The studio security had to intervene because they were shouting so loudly. The project was stalled for 3 weeks, costing $500 a very day. Schlesinger ultimately evaluated both versions in secret. Around 80% more children laughed at Blanc's goofy rendition. A lot of people even requested to view the amusing duck with a spit once more. Jones acknowledged years later, in 1982, that Black's interpretation fundamentally altered voice acting. However, until the 1950s, the two men hardly spoke to one another. Warner Brothers insiders still refer to August 12, 1940, as Black Tuesday. Mel Blanc arrived at 6 in the morning to record a wild hair for a long time. He frequently had to change personas in the middle of sentences, alternating between Bugs Bunny and Elmer Fudd. That day, all he had to sustain Bugs's hoarse voice was coffee and throat drops, and he smoked 3 packs of cigarettes. He began experiencing vocal cord spasms at the 14th hour. However, the studio did not summon a doctor when he fainted at around 2:00 a.m. All they asked him to do was rewrite the lines they didn't like. He continued till 4:30 in the morning, recording 847 lines and 312 voice changes. He was unable to speak for 6 days after that. Warner did not give him a bonus or compensate him for the days he missed. However, Warner made a fortune from the footage they recorded that night, which was ultimately divided into 4 distinct cartoons. Nobody anticipated the impact of the 1941 cartoon, The Wobbit Who Came to Supper. Although Mel had turned it into a gentle warning against hunting, it sparked an uproar across the country. He received more than 2,300 hate letters. There were even several from NRA organizations. In one letter, dead rabbit images were placed to form the word blank. Warner, meanwhile, was selling war bonds with Bugs Bunny. They earned $2 million from the campaign. Mel never saw a dime from the $18 million bonds they sold, even though Bugs Bunny's voice was heard saying, "Buy war bonds, Doc." Even attending the rallies was forbidden to him. When the studio informed them that he might be suspicious for inquiring as to why he was unable to attend events where his voice was being utilized, the FBI even filed a file on him. Let the hunters shoot, Warner executives reportedly said, laughing at the hate mail. We're profiting from both sides. Mel didn't learn about the war bond earnings until 1987, 46 years later. Tweety Bird originally appeared in A Tale of Two Kitties in 1942. Mel was instructed by filmmaker Bob Clampett to make Tweety sound like a defenseless baby bird. It did not sit well with Mel. The voice sounded too delicate and gentle for him. 3 hours were spent fighting in the studio. Mel finally caved in and blended the sound of a baby's cries with the chirping of his son's parakeet. It was successful. Tweety toys earned more than $3 million by 1945. However, Mel's contract stated that he received no items. Mel received the same flat fee as Warner executives, who made millions on Tweety. 1943 was a bad year. During the war, the majority of male voice performers were away fighting. As a result, Mel had to provide the voices of 22 distinct characters in Yankee Doodle Daffy, a 7-minute cartoon. For the duration of the production, he was paid only $350 for working 12-hour days, 6 days a week. In contrast, Warner earned $10 million from Looney Tunes that year. For each completed minute of cartoon, Mel received roughly 7 cents. Warner's hourly wage was $28,571. He handled almost 80% of the voice work for all the studios, under the same contract for the following 3 years. Usaid Sam, a new character, caused a fight between Mel and Tex Avery in 1944. Mel claimed the part was too aggressive for children, but Tex wanted Sam to be untamed and furious. To demonstrate his point, Tex brought actual Civil War pistols to the studio and fired blanks into the air. Despite being scared, Mel consented to record a single test session. Usaid Sam was born when he instantly came up with 50 different angry remarks. Approximately 1945 alone, the cartoon brought approximately $500,000. But Mel and Tex never collaborated again. Their friendship was irreparably damaged. Mel did everything he could to make Taz's roar sound authentic in 1945, while he was working on the Tasmanian Devil for Frigid Hair. He gargled ice, sand, and gravel. At the age of 37, he experienced breathing difficulties as a result of severely injuring his throat. Despite doctors' warnings that he would sustain long-term harm, the studio did not lessen his workload or pay for his medical care. He continued to record while holding pebbles in his mouth and coughing loudly to achieve the desired sound. Mel's voice never completely recovered, despite the character only making 5 cartoon appearances until 1964. He suffered from breathing issues for the remainder of his life and required throat surgery in 1961. Mel was performing 90% of Warner's voices in 1946, but his request for a raise was turned down. While the studio was making millions, he was only making $350 a week. In order to participate on The Jack Benny Show, he struck a covert agreement with NBC Radio for $100 per episode. To keep everything a secret, he worked 14-hour days and recorded those broadcasts at night. Warner would have been banned and dismissed if he had discovered. He survived thanks to that covert radio work. Later, according to his wife, they were on the verge of going bankrupt and had to borrow money from family members just to cover their bills and rent. Warner's contract prevented Mel from working on the Flintstones pilot by 1948, so he secretly voiced Barney Rubble under the fictitious name Tex Avery. By 1965, that program had earned over $100 million, making it one of the largest TV hits ever. Mel barely received $75. They confronted Warner in 1962 once he learned. Since all of the royalties went to the fictitious name, which Hanna-Barbera discreetly removed, the phony name tactic backfired. Mel referred to it as his worst financial error ever. Mel had a significant health crisis in 1950 while recording Rabbit of Seville. Every day he smoked 3 packs. Additionally, he coughed up blood during Bugs Bunny's opera scene. He had bronchitis and was taken to the hospital immediately. For squandered tape and dock time, the producer gave him $127. The company then surreptitiously recruited a second actor to record backup versions while Mel was still in the hospital. A janitor who overheard the scheme told Mel about it. He became aware that he was just viewed as a voice machine and not a real person. Mel made Speedy Gonzales in 1952, but it became controversial. Mel provided the well-known Arriba Arriba line, which Friss Frayling requested to have a fiery Mexican mouse voice. However, it was deemed offensive. There were protests. Despite calls from Latin American communities for the cartoons to be taken down, the box office results showed otherwise. Latin American sales increased by 40%. In 1955, Warner made $340,000 from Speedy toys. Mel received nothing. Later, he admitted that he felt guilty, but he had to do it because of financial constraints. Mel eventually retaliated in 1955. Warner didn't sign his name to anything for 25 years. Executives claimed that if people realized the characters were voiced by real humans, the magic would be destroyed. However, Mel's attorney threatened legal action. His voices had brought in $50 million for the studio, according to internal documents, but he was only earning $23,000 annually. Warner put up a fierce fight, including secretly trying new voice actors. Only when Mel's attorney threatened to reveal their tax fraud did they concede. Mel's name appeared in the credits, but he was unable to discuss the financial aspect due to the gag order. Warner arranged a last-minute recording session for Duck Dodgers in 1956, which caused Mel to miss his son's high school graduation. He was unaware of the conflict. While his son Noel delivered the valedictorian address, he devoted 14 hours to voicing Marvin the Martian. Lying to neighbors, his wife claimed that Mel had pressing business. Noel subsequently stated that he simply stopped anticipating his father's presence. Mel learned years later that the studio had done it intentionally. They wished to maintain his professional focus. Mel acknowledged that he felt like a ghost in his own house, and one CEO even boasted, "Keep talent away from family distractions." Mel began working as a freelancer in 1957 after his contract expired. For only $200 per episode, he provided the voice of George Jetson. Despite his renown as the man of 1,000 voices, studios continued to underpay him and view voice artists as cheap labor, even though the program became the cornerstone of Hanna-Barbera's $50 million empire. One foggy evening in 1959, he voiced Michigan Drog. He strained his voice by using throat-bending techniques. Warner withdrew his promised bonus since the animation went over budget. In order to pay taxes, Mel had to sell his house in the Hollywood Hills. They penalized him monetarily, even when he produced brilliant work. Mel Blanc was traveling down Sunset Boulevard in his silver Aston Martin DB4 at approximately 3:15 p.m. on January 24, 1961. At least he wasn't speeding any more than the others were. Everyone referred to that steep section of road as Dead Man's Curve. Hollywood celebrities continued to speed through that curve as if nothing could stop them, despite the fact that it had previously resulted in 26 accidents in just 2 years. However, something went horribly wrong this time. Mel struck a parked truck with his car. He was launched more than 40 feet into the air by the hit. Before smashing down, the automobile flipped 3 times. 50 feet from where the wreckage stopped, his shoes were discovered. In addition to losing 9 of his 12 pints of blood, he suffered a shattered pelvis, broken legs, and a triple fractured head. Initially, nobody recognized him. Only after seeing his Warner Brothers contracts inside the rumpled automobile did the police figure it out. According to experts at UCLA Medical Center, his chances of survival were about 20%. Day and night, his son Noel and wife Estelle remained by his side, hoping for anything. Mel remained still for 19 long days. He remained silent. His eyes did not even open. They were running out of time, and his brain activity was waning. Then an odd thing occurred. The doctor once addressed him as Bugs Bunny rather than Mel. He inquired, "How are you feeling today, Bugs?" Everyone in the room paused when a voice, barely audible, said, "What's up, Doc?" from that still broken corpse. His eyes remained closed, but his lips moved. Somehow, Bugs was still alive inside Mel, even if the actual Mel was no longer there. Everything changed in that one instant. It turned into an example of how a person's voice can become an integral part of who they are. His life was saved by just single line. Surviving, however, was not the end. It was only the start of something more difficult. For recuperation, Mel was sent to St. John's Hospital. From his neck to his ankles, his entire body was confined in a complete cast. He was immobile. He developed pressure sores on his legs and back. A few contracted the infection. He needs skin transplants. After only 2 weeks, Warner Brothers halted his payment, claiming that his absence was a breach of contract. He had a weekly income of $1,500, nothing as of yet. They did not help him, but continued to use his old recordings for cartoons. His hospital bills increased to $75,000, or almost $650,000 in today's currency. Their house had to be mortgaged by Estelle. To cover the expenses, she liquidated his vintage automobiles. Additionally, 52-year-old Mel had to regain her ability to walk. For several months, he was unable to talk clearly. All he could do was whisper. He thought it was over. Mel filed a $500,000 lawsuit against the city of Los Angeles in September 1961. He was right when he said that the road's design was hazardous. Only 100 feet before the abrupt curve, there were warning signs. The sharp curve and inadequate road banking might cause automobiles to lose control, even at the permitted 35 mph of speed limit. Guardrails weren't present. Due to budget shortages, investigators discovered that 847 complaints had been filed with the city since 1958, but nothing had been done. The whole traffic department trembled after Mel's lawsuit. Jobs were lost. In response, the federal government took action. The dispute was settled for $25,000 in March 1962. Even though it was well short of what he was due, it was sufficient to force the city to rework the curve. Additionally, it compelled them to implement safety precautions and warning systems for roadways frequented by celebrities. His case established a precedent in the law. Mel returned in a wheelchair to the Warner Brothers studio on June 19, 1961. Even though he was still recovering and in agony, he was unable to avoid his job. The terrible Snow Rabbit was the cartoon. To replace him, the studio had previously tried a number of voice performers, but none of them could match Mel's abilities. Thus, they returned him. He was limited to 15 minutes of recording time. Between sessions, they administered morphine to him. His tone had shifted. For Bugs Bunny to sound the same, engineers had to filter the audio. The agony persisted. The trauma didn't go away. Mel became really claustrophobic. He was unable to remain little. He continued to smoke 5 Lucky Strikes packs every day. The only thing that stopped the terror was that, according to his son, Mel was always curious as to why he lived when others did not. He was altered by that crash. He was no longer the cheerful voice man. In an attempt to feel important again, he started working non-stop. He continued to work, but his body continued to decline. He was always in pain from those metal pins in his legs. From his hospital bed, and occasionally even from home, he had to record certain voices. He provided the voices for over 200 parts in the Bugs Bunny Jacques Roadrunner film in 1979. However, he was not given a directorial credit by Warner Brothers. His health was deteriorating, they said. Despite the fact that the film made millions of dollars, they also failed to offer him the bonus he was expecting. In actuality, they took his work but gave someone else credit. During recordings, Chuck Jones Mel had to bring his oxygen tank. Despite his illness, he continued to give it his all. They took advantage of that. His family was also impacted by his health issues. Since the age of 9, Mel had been a smoker. He developed emphysema by the time he was in his 70s. Estelle, his wife, supported him, but it wasn't always easy. Eventually, Mel had to quit smoking, but the harm had already been done. Sessions of recording become shorter. He required oxygen pauses. At Blanc Communications, their production company, his son Noel took on additional responsibilities. Mel began taking on lesser jobs to help pay for her medical expenditures. He provided the voices of Heathcliff, Captain Caveman, and Jetsons episodes. However, his past came up with him. His strength was waning, and his voice was disappearing. He was having trouble breathing during recordings during the 1980s. He continued to work, but always kept the oxygen tank close at hand. His final significant part that he fully voiced was Heathcliff, which finished in 1988. The majority of actors his age had long since retired, but stopping was out of Mel's price range. He had to continue. So he did, even though it ached and nobody could see how much it cost him. Mel had heart issues and was taken to Cedars-Sinai on May 19, 1989. He was 81. He smoked 3 packs a day for decades, until his heart and lungs were completely destroyed. He fell off his hospital bed when he was under sedation and getting better. There were 2 snaps in his femur. That drop set off a sharp, abrupt collapse. He struggled to survive for 52 days. He weighed just 89 pounds. He always attempted to shield others from his suffering, and his final words to Noel were, "I'm fine, son." He passed away on July 10, 1989, from lung illness and heart failure. Chronic obstructive pulmonary disease was listed on his death certificate. At last, his voice, the most well-known in the world, was quiet. His gravestone reads, "That's all, folks." However, it conceals a painful reality. That term belonged to Warner Brothers. Mel's family was unable to profit from it. With that line, the company sold toys, mugs, and t-shirts. However, Estelle, his widow, had to sell his old recording gear and memorabilia for just $200. Looney Tunes brought in $4 billion annually for Warner. Warner executives even made a joke about Mel's gravestone being their best free marketing ever. According to later internal memos, Mel Blanc could not avoid being utilized, even in death. That's Not All, Folks is a tribute book written by Mel Blanc and published in 1990. It conveyed the truth. Mel had made Warner Brothers an offer of $1 million in 1978 to purchase a portion of the Bugs Bunny rights. They made fun of him. The book revealed that Mel made only $3,000 per episode, despite the fact that his voice brought in $50 million in merchandise annually. One executive even said, "Why buy the cow when we get the milk for free?" In 1988, he had quietly begun construction on his own animation studio. He brought on former Disney animators. He used his personal funds to spend $75,000. But that dream ended with his death. According to court documents, Warner purposefully postponed contract negotiations in 1989 in order to replace him amicably after his death. More than 400 characters were voiced by Mel Blanc. He contributed to almost 1,000 cartoons and television programs. He could perform 15 distinct voices in a single day. Prominent figures like Billy West and Hank Aaron claim to have learned everything from him. However, something greater resulted from his passing. It revealed the treatment of voice actors. They were not compensated for reruns. They weren't paid for toys or DVDs. SAG changed the regulations in 1993. As a result of Mel's case, voice performers began receiving residuals after that. The entire industry was altered by Mel's suffering. Nevertheless, no Hollywood filmmaker has ever produced a film based on his life. Warner Brothers stays away from it in silence. Asking inquiries is something they dislike. Mel's last wish was to give the Smithsonian his voice vault. He possessed unreleased stuff, secret characters, and uncommon recordings. The value exceeded $10 million. Warner Brothers rejected his desire for children to continue laughing and learning. They asserted that they owned every voice he produced. Everything was secured in their vaults. "I just wanted kids to keep laughing long after I'm gone," Mel said in his diary entry from July 8, 1989, 2 days before he passed away. However, that history and that laughter are now secured behind business walls. Not even his voice could be left to history by the guy who made the world laugh.